think you still have a question?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your talk, and I would like to extend my congratulations to ETs to do this big project. And talking about the new futures or the futures of PISA, I'm really worried about one point, and will be here from a long or 10, 15 years maybe, that the future of assessment is the computer-based assessment. And of course, it's not the future, it's the present. But the present in Spain or the present in USA is totally different. So you talk about bias, and you talk, of course, about the relationship between computer use, of computer familiarity, and the socioeconomic index. And of course, it's clear, and the socioeconomic index has a direct impact in the result of PISA. So in this term, I'm really worried about the bias related to the method. So you talk a little bit about this, and you also mentioned that the OECD, the plan is to design the PISA through computer-based assessment. So that means that maybe some countries or many countries are keeping behind. And even in the inter-countries comparisons, what is the impact? Or are you maybe dealing with training, special training sessions to reduce the impact associated to the method? Because you also show us a table with some data, and really was a big distributional differences between different groups. And when the distributional differences are big, even the methods for detecting bias or item functioning, they don't working well. So what are your plans with this?
Well, I mean, I think you asked, so that was a long question with a lot of good points in the question. I don't think I think PISA is really reflecting what's happening in societies. And you know, when they did the ERA report for 2009 reading, they also looked at an ICT familiarity and use survey and found that most students in the participating countries said they spent much more time outside of school using computers than in school. So I think, you know, all the data suggests that the world is becoming better connected, and that more and more people now have access to and use the internet, have access to computers in various forms, and the trend lines are still going up. So are there differences within and across countries in terms of percentages? Absolutely. But I think the unstated assumption is that countries who don't do this are going to be at a disadvantage, and individuals, and the data seem to suggest that individuals who are not using technology, who don't have access, it tends to be correlated with other things, including lower levels of education, less attachment to the labor force, less access to things within a society. I know in the US, you know, my observation of what's happening in a paper that we wrote about this was that more and more responsibility is being put on individuals. We were talking about this earlier, that in the US you no longer have defined pension plans. That is, I can't go to work for an employer and at the end of my work I'll get a defined pension. ETS, no defined pensions. You make a contribution every month, and whatever is there at the end of the time you retire, based on your investments, that's what you have to retire on. ETS, they make a contribution on a monthly basis, but then they have no responsibility once you retire to your pension. No real responsibility for health care. So more and more, I think responsibilities in countries are going to fall to individuals, and they're going to be less reliant on government, less reliant on corporations. At least that's the trend we see in the US. I think in a number of other countries that seems to be the trend. So I think skills are becoming more and more important. I think technology as a way of applying those skills are becoming more and more important. And well, you could call it a bias, or you could also say that's the way societies are evolving. I remember when I was in graduate school, there was a paper written by a guy at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education up in Canada called The Real Bias of Schooling. And his argument about schooling was that it was dependent on literacy. And if you weren't literate, you really couldn't benefit from schools. And he thought, that you could make the case that literacy was a bias for schooling, because without literacy, you couldn't succeed in school. Without schooling, you don't succeed in society. I think you're making a case that technology could become sort of the next bias, right? I mean, I didn't show you the data today, but we have data to show that unless you have adequate literacy and numeracy skills, you can't even get on the problem-solving scale. That problem-solving in technology-rich environment that is in part of PIAC requires higher levels of literacy and numeracy to be able to solve those kinds of information problems. And those information problems are becoming more and more integral and more integrated into what people do in their daily lives. So people who can't do them are, I think, at a disadvantage in terms of the responsibilities they have for being citizens, for being parents, and other roles that they play in society. So you can look at it as a bias, or you could just look at it as an evolution in the ways in which societies are going, and that programs of work like PISA are merely reflecting what's taking place in societies around the world. In terms of PISA specifically, at least for the foreseeable future, I think there will always be a paper and pencil version. So like in PIAC, I sort of consider this a sort of a transition period, and I don't know how long that period will be. But for PIAC, round 1, round 2, we have to have a paper version as well as a computer version. There are parts of the computer that you can't do on paper. So to the extent measurement changes to reflect those constructs or those domains, people who are limited to paper won't be able to participate. Again, you can say, well, that's a bias, or that's just the way life is, and the assessments are just reflecting what it is people have to do. So I do believe that there is data that you could look at to show that people without those skills have less and less access to things that they value and things that societies value, and they will over time become, I think, more disadvantaged in terms of that access. So, you could argue, I think, that societies shouldn't go in that direction, but I don't think I'm going to have much say in that. You probably won't have much say in that. So I think that's the direction that we're headed, and I don't believe that we'll turn back. I think it's just the way we're evolving. So I wouldn't put it all on PISA.
Thank you so much. And I have another question, and it is about the psychometric methods. I know that ETS is working in new estimation procedures because they found that the estimation of IRT parameters maybe is different in different countries, or they have different error of estimation. And my question is ETS thinking in generating new software for estimation PISA and to give to everyone interested on that? So what are your plan about it?
Yeah, so there are kind of two things going on. I mean, there are people at ETS who are applying sort of, you might call, more modern methods of psychometrics, IRT models. So PISA uses primarily, or has primarily used, one-parameter models. Okay. They tend not to fit this kind of data as well as two-parameter models. I think what we proposed for 2015 was to use a hybrid model where the one-parameter model works, use the one-parameter model. So those items that show no interaction. But then for items that do, use the two-parameter model because you get better fit. That'll reduce the amount of interactions, we think. So we'll look at the field test data and we'll be able to see, and that'll be part of technical reports that get produced. So I think part of what we're trying to do is use existing methodology and newer methodology that we think will improve measurement for 15. There are other people who are also working on research grants to look at sort of next generation software. In terms of software that does these hybrid models, it already exists. There's one person at ETS who makes it available publicly. His name is Matthias van Davier. So you can buy his software. I think he does workshops. We've tried, and we will continue to try. We have an institute with IEA where we're trying to promote the use of large-scale assessment data for students and researchers and others. So we do 2 workshops a year with IEA. Typically, countries host those workshops. They're limited to around 30, 35 people. Psychometricians from ETS and IEA go and conduct those workshops. You can use either IEA data, or you can use PISA or PIEC or any data set you want. But they focus much more on the methodology of how to use those data, how to use these more complex data sets as a way of trying to promote. So we're trying to do that. And as I said, the software is available. So I think there's more concerted effort now to try to do what you might call technology transfer or training workshops, so people have so as more and more people become interested in the data, I think these workshops and this ability to try to train more people, get more people familiar with the software, will continue to grow. We've made commitments to offer workshops as part of the PISA contract. So when it comes time to looking at the field test and the main survey data, we'll provide some workshops with using the data. We've also created this tool for the U.S. government called Data Explorer. So all of the PISA data, all of the PIAC data will go into this tool. So for people who are not sophisticated enough to run their own programs, you can just go in and query the system, and you can generate tables and graphs and so far. It's all done in real time. So those will be made available free of charge and will be supported on the OECD websites. PIAC data go live on the Data Explorer, I think, in October of this year. The U.S. government has put earlier cycles of PISA and TIMSS up on that, but it's on a U.S. website. And we've offered to put 2015 PISA in the Data Explorer and put it on the OECD website. So I think access to the data, software, workshops, I think will all kind of help in the direction that you're talking about. Any other questions, comments, disagreements? You're free to disagree with. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yep.